We're at the top of the hour. Just a few announcements before we begin. A certificate of attendance will be provided to all of you who have attended here in WebEx today. And we also would like to announce that beginning on January 1st, we've begun to provide library-specific courses free to all who work in libraries or volunteer in libraries across the country. We also have archived webinars in the catalog, and for all of those courses and archives, you would receive a certificate. So thank you to the great support of OCLC, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and many library agencies across the U.S. for their support of this service to all. Just a reminder that we will be providing a link to today's archive via email after today's session, but as always, those archives will be available through WebJunction. And if you're not yet subscribed to Crossroads, our monthly e-newsletter, it's an excellent way to stay up to date on all of our ongoing events, resources, programs, projects, and we look forward to sharing news with you via Crossroads. Just one more reminder that if you do have technical needs, please post those questions to the bottom right panel on your view, the Q&A panel where that little question mark is. If for some reason you end up outside this WebEx environment, the WebEx support number is in the email I sent to you. An extra special welcome to those of you who are joining via our live stream. Today's topic is very popular, so we did need to close registration, but we're really excited that you've joined via the live stream as well. My name is Jennifer Peterson, and I'm joined today by our production team, Aniwa Ferrari, who is managing our live stream, and Kathleen Gessinger, who is logged in as WJ support. And as always, I'm excited to be able to work with them. I'd also like to welcome you on behalf of the Learning Roundtable. I am a very proud Learning Roundtable member, and we're thrilled to be able to partner on this WebJunction event. If you are not yet familiar with the Learning Roundtable, it's an excellent way to stay connected with others who are providing training in their communities. This ALA team is can be found on all sorts of social networking sites, and I know many of you are ALA Roundtable members and joining us today. So welcome to all of you. All right, well, let's get started here. I'm really excited to welcome Crystal Schimpf, who is also an ALA Learning Roundtable member, someone who I've had the great pleasure of working with on a number of different projects. And Crystal, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to you, and welcome and thank you so much.
Great, well, thank you, Jennifer, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining today. Before we begin, I do just want to say thank you to WebJunction and the Learning Roundtable for having me for this webinar. This is a topic I'm very passionate about, and so I'm really happy to be able to share it with all of you today. Over the next 50 minutes or so, I'm going to share 10 skills for teaching tech to library patrons. And these skills will focus largely on teaching tech to patrons in the public library environment, but these skills can be easily adapted or transferred to other environments, other types of libraries, and other topics. Now, whether you're new to technology training or you're an experienced veteran, I hope that you walk away with a few new ideas for how to improve your own skills. So please, join the discussion in chat and ask questions and share ideas throughout the webinar. We'll have a few sections for Q&A where I'll address questions specifically. You can also join in the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag, as Jennifer mentioned, WJWebinar and at ALA Learning for the conversation on Twitter, especially those of you who are joining perhaps through the live stream. That'd be a great way to hear from you as well. So with that, let me just tell you a little bit about myself before we start, if we're meeting for the first time. I'm a degreed librarian, but I no longer work within the walls of one library. I've worked as a librarian and a technology trainer in public libraries and nonprofits, and I've worked as a technology training consultant at the Colorado State Library. I've spent a lot of time researching and working in the field of digital literacy in libraries. and in nonprofit settings. And now I'm an independent training consultant, and I co-own a business called teachable. I work out of my home in Berkeley, California, and I like to say that we have two seasons here, sunny and foggy. And this particular moment, we're in the foggy season, but that might change later today. So let's get things started by taking a little bit of reflection on our own experiences. I'd like you to reflect and think of a time when you had to learn a new technology and you had the assistance of an instructor or a tutor or somebody who was helping you. Now, this could have been in an individual setting or perhaps being taught by a coworker or a family member or a friend, or it could have been in a group setting through a formal computer class or a staff training. Remember everything you can. Just take a minute. Remember what you can about that experience, including what it was you were learning and what methods the instructor or the person giving instruction utilized in order to help you learn. So think about that for just a minute. And then I want you to think about what worked well in that situation. What happened during the instruction that really helped you learn the material? But I also want you to think about maybe what didn't work. What happened in the interaction that made it more difficult for you to learn? Did you learn what you needed to learn at the end of it, and were you able to apply the knowledge later? If any of you are willing, I invite you to share some of your ideas and thoughts in the chat while you're maybe typing or thinking about this. I'll share some examples from my own experience. And now I've attended several different technical software trainings to learn how to use some of the more complex databases that exist in our world. Now, in the first example, the training worked very well for me because the instructor guided us through a step-by-step process to customize the database to our needs. The example was really relevant to me because it addressed the common needs that I could identify with. Tracking donors for a nonprofit. I learned a lot, and I was able to apply some of the knowledge right away after I left the training. Now, in the second example, I attended a training for a custom database to track measurable goals in nonprofits. Now, I was very interested in this topic. I was very motivated to learn, but unfortunately, I walked away with very little working knowledge of the subject. One of the things in the training that didn't work well for me was that all of the examples referred to business, profit margins, on-time deliveries, sales goals. And while I was able to understand how those concepts could relate to the nonprofit world and the library world, I was constantly having to translate it in my mind. So I was going back and forth. And I spent more time trying to make sense of those examples rather than learn how to actually use the database. I can see that all of you are coming up with similar ideas as well. And, as you're thinking through these different scenarios, these examples of your experience, you may be identifying some of the challenges you really experienced as a learner. You may also be identifying some of the key challenges that instructors faced. And so you might even find yourself empathizing with the instructor, right? We know that it can be very difficult to teach technology, and there are lots of challenges. So let's start to turn this exercise towards ourselves and visualize yourself as a technology instructor in a library setting. Some of you may already be doing this. In fact, many of you may be doing this already. What challenges do you face as an instructor? So you're thinking about that. What I'll say here is that I think that most of the challenges that we face relate in some degree to the items you see on the screen. Interpersonal communication. The way that we communicate with learners can be a really big challenge. The teaching techniques that we actually use to provide instruction is a skill that we all want to and can learn more about. Keeping learners engaged can be tricky, and especially I see some of you mentioning the different learning preferences or styles, the different levels of experience we have in the audience, the different types of people we have in our room. Can make it tricky. And also the way we react to different situations that arise. We can get caught off guard in a training and react in a way that then kind of throws us off. And so these four categories, I think, really address most of the challenges that we have in technology. The other point I want to make here is that most of these challenges don't actually relate the technology. And sometimes we get really caught up in the fact that we're teaching technology and that it's the technology that's hard. And that may be true, but and of course we want to learn more and have a very good basic understanding of whatever technology we're teaching that day. That is important. But I think the bigger challenges actually come from the actual teaching skills. Some of these skills are not easily defined, and we like to maybe call them soft skills, if you know that term. And focusing on developing our teaching skills will help us support our goal to really provide that effective instruction and quality services to library patrons. Now, I hope to define some of these teaching skills for you today so that you can walk away with practical knowledge that you can apply in your library. I won't be teaching any specific technology skills, but there are many resources if you would like to learn more about technology, and I've included a few of my favorites in the archive that Jennifer has shared and that will be shared again at the end of the webinar. So today we're focusing on live in-person instruction as opposed to virtual, web, or recorded instruction. And when we talk about this type of instruction, we can really group it into two major settings. In the one-on-one setting, you as the instructor might help somebody individually, one person at a time. This might be on the library floor, on public access computers, during an open lab drop-in, assisting somebody with their mobile device, or in a private book-a-librarian type appointment. Instruction may be taking place one-on-one, even when a casual question is asked. And if you're helping somebody with technology in any way, there's always an opportunity for instruction there. You often won't know in one-on-one instruction what the topic is until you're in the middle of the interaction, so there's often not time to prepare. Now, in the group setting, you're an instructor in front of a group of people, and you're trying to reach the entire group with the same concepts during the same period of time. Group instruction often involves more planning and preparation, and most of the time you'll work from some type of curriculum or instructional outline, and you may have planned activities. Another thing is that group instruction will usually focus on a single topic, although it can be very difficult to stay on point when you have a group of curious learners. And I can see, I just want to say that I see all these great comments coming into the chat, and I hope you'll continue that as we go in. We're going to be looking at different skills, and I've kind of divided them to be fair into two categories, just like we've discussed. So we get about 5 skills for each type of instruction. Now, I've formatted these skills to look a little bit more like tips so that they'll be easy for you to remember, shorten them down. But each of these skills ties to basic competencies for technology trainers. And I've included some examples of these competencies with the archive material, so I invite you to review those when the webinar is over. I'll go into each of these skills in detail, giving you some real-life examples as well as practical tips so that you know how to execute each of these skills. Depending on how much experience you have, some of these may seem familiar, but for those of you who are just starting out, this may seem like a lot of information. So my hope is that regardless of what level you're currently at, that you walk away with a few new ideas and you are able to improve your own skills at providing tech instruction, sharing those ideas also with others on your team who may benefit from them. Now let's start off by looking just at the one-on-one skills. These skills can also be applied in group settings, but they're essential for one-on-one instruction. I'll walk you through how to be welcoming, assessing the need of the learner, giving up control to the learner, being present, teaching in the moment, or being present and teaching in the moment, I should say, and taking it slow. I'll ask you to share your ideas in the chat as we go along, so please join the conversation there. And again, you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Now, the first skill that you need to have when providing technology instruction is the ability to be welcoming. Now, you might be thinking, that isn't really a skill. It's something more maybe out of Emily Post's book of etiquette or something. But I'm telling you that actually the ability to create a welcoming environment is a skill, and that it's one that's taught in hospitality schools across the world. Being welcoming really is about providing good customer service to library patrons, and good customer service should allow the patron to feel like they're right to be asking for assistance. If you think of this, we wouldn't want to make someone feel uncomfortable for asking for a book about sexuality. So why would we want to make them feel uncomfortable if they ask a question about email? Now, the challenge is, of course, that we often inadvertently react to technology questions with our own fear, our apprehension, or maybe our distaste of that particular topic. And by practicing our customer service skills, we can provide a warm welcome to those who are learning technology. Now, I'm sure you can think of many ways to be welcoming when it comes to technology instruction. I'm going to share a few of my favorites, but I'd like for you to share your ideas in the chat as well. One of the easiest ways to be welcoming is just to remember to smile. A smile sends a message that you're a friendly person and you're there to help. And now, if smiling doesn't come natural for you, it's a skill worth practicing because it can really set the tone for a more positive experience for the learner. Secondly, it's most important to meet the learner where they are, physically, emotionally, and cognitively. Walk over to their computer, crouch down or sit next to them. That way you're not hovering over them. Try to put yourself in their shoes. What might they be going through, and what are they ready to learn? Where are they in the learning spectrum? Lastly, take some time to get to know the learner. What is their life story? By opening yourself up to their story, they'll be able to be more open with you and tell you what they need, and you'll develop a good rapport with them. Their experiences may help inform your instruction techniques, and we tend to shy away from this kind of small talk with library patrons, but there really is a benefit there. Lots of great ideas in the chat that I'm seeing as well. Of course, eye contact goes right with that friendly smile, and also really being able to listen. We're actually going to get to that in just a minute here, so we'll be talking more about those listening skills. Very good point. Now, as far as assessing the need, this is the second skill on our list, and there are two types of need that we really need to think about here. First, we need to assess what their technology needs are. What is it that they're trying to learn? Second, we need to assess their learning needs, including how they will learn most effectively. And just like with research requests at the reference desk, it can be easy to jump to conclusions about what someone needs or wants to do with technology. By assessing their needs, we can be sure to address them in a more focused and efficient manner. So how do we go about assessing the need? There are several things I can recommend here. First, ask questions, and lots of them, especially open-ended questions. What are some examples you might think of as questions we might ask technology learners when we're assessing their need? One of my favorites is a goal-oriented question. It's pretty open-ended. What would you like to be able to do through my help? You know, and I see, you know, you've got some ideas coming in here. What would you like to learn today? Absolutely. Those are just nice open-ended questions where we can get the patron talking about their need. Now, the next three items on this list really go together. Whether you're helping someone with a single question asked on the library floor or spending a 30-minute appointment with them, it's well worth the time to clarify their question and help them identify their goals. It can be very easy to jump to conclusions or impose our ideas of what they might need, but tech instruction really should be about what the patron needs and wants, so let's keep that in mind. Lastly, it helps to learn what they're interested in outside of technology, because then you can use those examples to help motivate them to learn more. Do they like sports? Maybe you can show them how to get live updates from their favorite sports team. Now, it takes time and practice to develop these needs assessment skills, so let each interaction you have become a personal practice to develop these skills. Now, the next skill that I'm going to talk about is really an exercise in self-restraint to some extent. While it might seem easy and conceptually, it really takes practice to execute it well. Now, when we're teaching content to others, it's important to give up, or when we're teaching computers to others, it's important to give up the control to the computer and let them drive. Most people learn to use technology by doing, not by watching. And as much as that learner might resist, you must insist that they be in control of the computer or device. Now, if you already have some experience in providing tech instruction, you may be able to relate to the story I'm about to tell. Now, I've noticed that some patrons, especially older adults, don't think they can learn technology, and they're sometimes a bit embarrassed about it. Now, I had an older woman once ask me to help her fill out a form online, you know, those box-like forms that we see. And when I approached her computer to help, she offered me her chair. Here, why don't you do it for me? And I knew that this was an opportunity to teach her something new and to empower her. So what I said was, no, why don't you sit here? I'll let you drive, but I'll walk you through it. Let me pull up a chair. And so then I sat there with her for a few minutes to get her through the process. I could tell she was nervous, but she did a great job and she did learn a few new things. Now, I want to clarify here that we're framing this skill in terms of effective training techniques. Now, I know there are many debates as to whether or not library staff should do something or complete a task for a patron using a computer or with a patron's e-reader or mobile device. Now, your library, every library is free to determine what policies related to this topic as you choose. But today we're framing this around best practices for training, and our goal is for patron learning. So that's what we're keeping in mind. So again, there are a few specific ways that we can give the control over to the patron when it comes to technology instruction. Now, I used to always say, don't touch the mouse, and I think that's true still. But there's more than just the control of the computer. It also gives the patron space to practice, and it empowers them to lead the conversation about what they want to learn. So these tips here for giving up control: first of all, let them drive and be in control of the computer at all times. Second, by putting them in control, they're getting a hands-on practice, which will help them retain the process. Third, let them lead the interaction. Let their questions and needs drive instruction. This is a very flexible way to approach it, and it's one of the great advantages of one-on-one instruction. And lastly, make it a collaboration between the two of you. Work together to make learning happen. And I just saw somebody mention positive reinforcement, and that's a great way to couch this, as being very encouraging for the learner. I think that the hardest part of this skill is finding the right way to tell reluctant learners that they're in control. It takes practice and maybe devising some stock phrases to have in your back pocket for when the situation arises. But again, each opportunity or each interaction is an opportunity really for you to practice your skills in that area. Now, this fourth skill is one of my favorites, and it's one that's often overlooked. Being present in the moment means really being mentally focused on the task at hand. It means being mindful of everything around you. And with technology instruction, this means focusing on the learner and their need. Being present helps us do a better job as an instructor or trainer because it allows us to respond more effectively. It also puts a better impression on the learner if we aren't constantly distracted by other things. Being present takes practice, and there are specific things we can do to hone our skills to be more mindful of what's happening in the current moment. Now, let's just take a minute, and maybe you'll think about some of the other activities that require this type of presence. What are some of the things that require you to be present outside of technology training or library work? How do you maintain focus in those areas? One of the things I can think of is riding a mountain bike or any type of bicycle, driving a car, absolutely, parenthood, all things that require us to be mindful. And if you think about how you focus on those situations and you focus on the current moment, we can draw analogies from those examples to remind us in technology training how we can be more present and mindful as well. Now let's just take a look at some of the specific ways we can be present during technology instruction. First, we should always listen closely to the learner and pay attention to those nonverbal cues that they may be giving us. Now there's a trap that we often fall into when we're listening. We often begin to think of our response before we've even finished hearing the question, before our learner has finished answering it, or asking it. Now, when we switch into the mode of formulating our answer, our brains have stopped listening. So see if you can wait until that question has been asked before you work on thinking of a response. You have more time than you think, I promise. Now, second, make sure that you're listening closely, and by doing that, you'll be able to react more thoughtfully, okay? You can take into account the needs that you've identified, and you can think more about the library patron's interests. Craft your reaction in the best interest of that patron. Third, I like to think of instruction like a form of improvisation, much like the type of improvisation that takes place in music. A jazz musician may know the melody or the form of a song, and much like a technology instructor, knows the basic materials that need to be taught. But the jazz musician will improvise on that tune and may also respond to the other members of the band. In fact, if he didn't respond to what's going on around him, it may just sound like noise. A technology instructor needs to improve. The technology instructor wants to improvise on the needs of the learner in order to react in harmony with their needs. So improvisation is something to keep in mind. Now, the last two things on the list here go hand in hand. Admit your limits. Don't be afraid to admit if you don't know something. And if a question or situation arises that you aren't familiar with, take it as an opportunity to explore it with the learner. You don't have to know everything about technology in order to be able to help that learner accomplish their goals. You can learn together. Now, the last skill that I have here in our 5 one-on-one technology teaching skills, this also applies to group instruction quite well, and it is to go slow. Now, this isn't just about going at a slower pace, but also about being deliberative about what you share. The turtle often gets a bad rap for his slow pace, but if you've ever watched a turtle move, then you'll know that his movements are very deliberate, putting one foot forward to take a step. And this is a great way to get somewhere. No matter what speed you go, you can still follow the same path and get to the same destination. The same applies for technology instruction. Many people learning technology need to learn it one step at a time. If we can be deliberate in our instructions, then the steps will be easier. Again, here are some ways we can slow it down. The first one, break it down into deliberative, discrete steps, as I was just saying, and then take it one step at a time. Next, focus on carefully selecting your teaching points. What's most important or essential, or what is extraneous? Focus on the essential points first. One advantage to having fewer teaching points is that you have less material to cover, which means you don't have to rush through the information. Even in situations where you aren't preparing in advance, like a one-on-one instruction, you can still benefit from this slow pace. Now, third on the list is try not to assume that someone already knows something. Ask the patron what they already know to ensure that your instruction is effective and that it doesn't go over their head, or speak in terms that are too basic, the other end of the spectrum. You may want to practice how you'll clarify the current knowledge that they have. And again, maybe you ask them, what type of experience do you already have in this topic? Can you tell me what you've already done? Lastly, remember to be patient. Now, patience is something that does not come easily. I've seen several of you mention it already, so I know it's something that's on all of our minds. One thing I do to remind myself to be patient is I take a deep, slow, and soft breath, and that helps me slow down my own pace. Just be careful if you use this technique not to let your breath sound like you're impatient, right? So that's why I say slow and deep and very soft in your breath. So those are the first 5 skills that we have in our list. We do have group instruction, skills 6 through 10, coming up next. But before we do that, I thought maybe we would see if there are any questions. Jennifer, do we have any questions in the chat?
Yeah, there's been some excellent conversation going on in chat. People have been very good about responding to your questions. There were a couple things that came up that I thought would be great to hear from you on. There was a person that mentioned that staffing is an issue, and I know that in many libraries where there's not as many people, that this person said they were the only front desk person at their library. Do you have some suggestions for that situation? Especially someone else mentioned that when they're spending time helping patrons one-on-one, sometimes those patrons come to think of them as their personal tutor every time they come into the library. So perhaps a combination of those situations and the ideas you have on how to set those boundaries and to be efficient with as many folks as we have that need our assistance.
Yeah, that's a great question, and so I'll address the first part of it first, which is, when you're the only person and you're having to juggle checking out books and helping people find information and helping people on the computers, there is a nice juggling technique you can use. And so, we're talking about these skills in a perfect world where you would sit down with a person and teach them through every step of the way. Another technique you can use is to get somebody started in an area, and then that way they're able to maybe move forward while you go take care of some other things and you can check back with them. And I think it also gets back to the idea that we have practiced the way we talk to patrons about this so that we're not letting them feel like they're not able to get assistance, right? Oh, well, this isn't a place where I can help them. If you've decided at your library that this is a priority, then, you know, you want to make sure the patrons feel that all the time too, even if you're very busy. So I think of it as like a very gentle juggling technique to get multiple things done and keep checking back. Another technique, and I mentioned book a librarian appointments earlier, that can be a great way that if you have the person come back and say, you know, I'm very busy, it's just after school, all the kids have just come in. Do you have time in the mornings? The library is much quieter at that time, and I could help you out more at that point. And see if they can come back. Now, to address the personal tutor issue, or kind of this personal assistant where they're always coming to you for questions and advice, I think setting some boundaries is important, and this is definitely a challenging situation. And I like to frame it in what I can do for you. So sometimes the patrons start to bring everything. Well, you know what I can do is I can help you for about 10 minutes today, or about 5 minutes right now, and then I've got some other things I need to do. But maybe that'll get you started. And in the process of doing that, maybe also helping that patron see that there are other avenues where they could continue to learn. But I think setting that boundary so you're not always kind of stuck in a 45-minute session every day with a person who's maybe more motivated by social interaction than by learning. So I think it's good, you know, to get the learner to focus on their goals, you can help them through that process, but then set that boundary and say, okay, I'm going to go take care of some of the other work that's happening at the library now. So hopefully that helps out a little bit. I know it's a very difficult situation to handle.
Yeah, those are excellent tips. Other folks chimed in and reminded the option of setting folks up with some of the more self-paced options that you reference in your resources, the Goodwill site and the PLA Digital Learn site as well. So,
yeah, and I see somebody just mentioned volunteers, and that's another thing. If you are the only person in your library that works out front, or if there are times of the day where there's only one person and it's very busy, if you do have volunteers in the community or high school students or college students that can help out, that's a great way to engage volunteers.
Exactly. I was just going to say that. The other thing that I think is really something that many folks are dealing with is at the beginning when you talked a little bit about how they are coming to us, is situations where they're really maybe coming quite frustrated even before they begin. They've been told they can only get a job if they learn how to use the computer, or situations where we really have reluctant learners and they're very frustrated. They say, you know, I can't learn anything, this is hopeless. Or perhaps they refuse to take the mouse, they refuse to take the wheel. So I know that, speaking of soft skills, you know, a lot of times in libraries, we're really dealing with patrons as social workers. We're really being that listening ear and taking it slow. So I'd love to hear some of the ways that you sort of tackle that role in your work.
Yeah, and I think this really, it is a big challenge, and each situation can present its own unique dynamic. And I think this is where going back to the point about being present can be very helpful, and really trying to see that moment for what it is, and maybe taking a deep breath, kind of listening to the patron a little bit and getting them to talk about what's going on. Sometimes that can be very helpful in the sense that the patron then has talked through whatever's frustrating them, and now you listen to them, and now you are both on the same page and might be able to move forward. I think also that helping the patron understand what's involved. Sometimes the frustration comes from that, you know, there are so many steps, and they need to fill out this form right now, and they don't have an email address, and they've not used a mouse much before, and going online and using the internet is just something very foreign to them. And so helping them understand that although computers are perceived as being very fast, that it takes time to learn them. And again, setting a boundary that the library can help them learn if they need something more immediate, is there someone else in their life that could help them complete the forms? Again, going back to this idea of, how much does the library take on? And if your library is one that would not actually complete the form for them, and I think many are in that, have made that choice, then can we help refer them to somebody else who could help them directly? So those are just some of the ideas that come to my mind as the way I might handle that situation. But I think really bringing it back to the human interaction that exists there. There's a person coming to the library in need, and they've come to you, and how can you just help address it as a human and then find the right solution that's going to help them?
Fantastic. Well, I know people are eager to hear what you have to say about group training, so we'll move on and we can circle back to some of the other questions after that.
Great. So we have 5 more skills to address that are related to group training, and some of the skills, also will transfer over to one-on-one. So there's a lot of adaptation you can do here. So if you don't do group training, I think you'll still find some benefit here. But we'll be looking at setting the space up for learning, communicating clearly, actively involving the learners in instruction, keeping your own balance, and ways that you can assign practice. So please continue to add your questions in the chat and your comments. It's great to see such a lively discussion happening there. Now, the 6th skill that's on the list is to know how to set the space up in a way that encourages learning and will make your instruction more effective. Any type of group computer class is going to face challenges when it comes to the space. Between the technology, the projector screen, the noise of the computers, the furniture, these are all factors that can impact your space. And depending what your library is like, you may not have a formal computer lab to work with, and that's fine too. When I talk about setting the space, I mean this is about working with whatever you've got. And whether that's laptops gathered around a large table or a formal lab, you want to set it up for learning. Now, I've spent a lot of time working with small and rural libraries, and I've seen a number of creative solutions out there to this space issue. One library actually held their classes after hours because all of their computers were in the public service area, and that way they could hold the classes without disrupting patrons, and regular activities in the library did not disrupt the class, so that worked out really well. Another library converted a storage room in the basement into a laptop classroom for up to 6 students. It was really cozy, but it worked well. And both of these libraries had successes, even despite the space limitations, because they created an environment in that space that worked. The environment really has more to do with the way you treat the space and the way you interact with people in the space than the physical nature of the space itself. So let me share some ways that you can set your space up for success. And if you have any ideas, please share them in the chat. So one of the first things that you can do to set the space is to welcome in your learners. Try to be there early so that you can greet students and get to know them before the class begins. And being there early also gives you time just to set up the technology and make sure everything is working. Second, give some thought to the actual environment. You may not have control over some of the aspects of the physical space, but try to think of what you can do to make the environment more comfortable. Being attentive to people's creature comforts, like room temperature and lighting, that's one place to start. You might also incorporate some type of visuals or displays in the room area that help set the space up for class. And bulletin boards, whiteboards, signage, those are all ways you can brighten up the space and get people in the right mindset to learn. Third, it's very important to accommodate and be sensitive to any physical challenges or disabilities that people may have. And so make sure that everyone can see and hear, and that they can easily get in and out of their seats as much as possible. And lastly, set expectations. I see some responses to this in the chat. Let your learners know what to expect from the workshop, what the schedule or agenda will include. Will there be breaks, and when can they ask questions? This helps ease the mind of the learners. They don't have to worry or wonder about the basic details. Now, number 7 is communicate clearly, and it may be no surprise to you that communication is a very important skill for instruction. And with technology instruction, it's even more important because we need our learners to be able to receive and understand information before they can learn it. Clear communication is something that takes practice, and it's something we can continually reflect on and improve. Given the complexity of technology, communication can be doubly challenging, so just think of it this way. Try explaining cloud computing to a group of library patrons. There's a great potential for confusion on this subject, and I think that even for most of us who maybe are experienced technology users, concepts like this can be very difficult to explain. It's important to distill the concept down to the most essential elements, and to simplify that concept so the learners can really understand it. Now remember that the learners don't need to understand every detail of how a computer works in order to operate it successfully. So regarding cloud computing, here's one way you might explain it. When you use web-based computer software like email, you're using cloud computing. A good example of cloud-based email is Gmail, created by Google. When you use Gmail, you don't have to download anything to your computer. All of your email messages are stored in the cloud and can be accessed through any internet connection. You can access your Gmail account from any computer or mobile device that's connected to the internet. Now, there are certainly many details I could have included, but didn't. But I don't have to explain every single detail in order to get the concept across. For people who are learning about cloud computing for the first time, it's better to keep it simple. And by including a relevant example, it gives learners something to relate it to, which is very important. So here are some other guidelines for communicating clearly. Just as we've discussed, try to simplify the ideas and give relevant examples. But also avoid the use of technical jargon. Use simpler terms whenever possible. When you do have to use jargon, be sure to define it clearly and simply. And in the example we just discussed, cloud computing definitely was a jargon term, but I was defining it within my explanation. I could have used a lot of other confusing terms, but I didn't. Now, what are some of the jargon terms you can think of that might come into technology instruction? Maybe share some of those in the chat. The last thing, as you're thinking of that, the last thing on the list is really to check in with learners and to allow time for questions. This way you can make sure to clarify concepts that are still unclear and review what's been covered. Great, you're nailing all of these jargon terms nailing them right on the head, hitting the nail right on the head as they're coming into the chat, absolutely. And many of these we can't avoid using them, but we can define them and only use them in the context where it's necessary, right? Great. So moving into skill number 8, whenever possible, we should involve learners through activities and through discussion. And when learners are engaged in the content, they're less likely to be distracted and more likely to pay attention. And this means they're more likely to retain the information because of that participation. Now, with technology instruction, this is especially important because most patrons are trying to reach technology-based learning goals. So their goals, they want to actually learn how to use technology, not just understand it. What are some of the ways we can involve learners in technology instruction? Feel free to share some of your ideas in the chat as we go through some of the tips that I have. Now, first on my list is to include lots of activities. This is a great way to involve learners. The activities could be structured, guiding them through specific practice exercises. Activities can be open-ended, allowing the learner to choose the way to interact with the subject. So imagine teaching internet search with two different approaches here. You could have them all practicing the same predefined search term, so they would all be viewing similar search results. Or you could let them choose their own search terms, and then they'd be using something that they might be motivated to learn more about. Both are okay, and each of those approaches or tactics serves a different purpose. Second on the list, be on the lookout for different learning preferences. And I saw people mention learning styles or learning preferences, and this really comes down to the way people like to learn. Not everybody likes to engage in discussion or conversation over learning. So how can you help them interact in a class where maybe you do have discussion questions? How do you keep them engaged? And some participants may not want to take notes. So how can you keep them engaged if there's a note-taking section and they're not involved with that? So how can you accommodate multiple preferences? The third on the list is to get learners to really work together. This is a great tactic and can be very effective in learning. As people work together, they actually deepen their learning on a topic. So can you pair up learners so they work together on an exercise, or partner up more experienced learners with less experienced learners. That way they can learn from one another and help each other out. Lastly on the list, we have that we should ask learners what they want to learn. Now this one seems like a big risk. What if they want to learn something that you don't know about? What if they ask about something inappropriate? Now, if you remember our tip from earlier about improvising and being flexible, you can still find a way to be responsive and react appropriately if those situations arise. The benefit really is that learners may be more engaged because they're more motivated to learn about something that they're interested in. So see if you can find a way to balance the content you have prepared with the topics they're interested in. And that leads me right into skill number 9, which is to stay balanced when possible. Teaching technology can be a lot like surfing. Every time you teach, it's like going out to catch a wave. You aren't quite sure what that wave is going to look like and how big it's going to be or what it's going to throw at you, but the goal is to ride the wave as long as possible without falling off your surfboard. In order to ride the wave, you must maintain balance. Now, in technology instruction, we aren't quite sure what each class will present in terms of participant questions, tech problems, or challenging situations, but maintaining a balance between focus and flexibility will help you be more effective as a technology instructor. Now, if you do get thrown off balance, don't worry. Then you just reset and try again. So how do we find that balance? First of all, the balance between focus and flexibility is really the most important thing. Try to keep focus on the topic at hand, but be flexible enough to go off topic when it serves the interests of the class. Second, don't let one person derail the topic with tangential questions. Find a way to address off-topic questions outside of class time. Third, if there's a lot of energy in class, try to direct it towards the topic at hand. Sometimes learners get very excited about a topic, and that's a good thing. But harness that energy into learning and not distraction. Lastly, if you're having a rough class or a difficult situation arises that throws you off balance, take time to reset. I like to give participants a practice break, just a few minutes so you can address the individual, the situation, or the tech problem that's causing you to get thrown off balance. So we've made it to the last tip in our top 10 skills for tech instruction, and this is to assign practice both during and after the workshop. Practice time is when most learning will take place, and learners can transfer that knowledge into action. It's very important. Most people will need more than just lecture and demonstration in order to learn, and given the hands-on nature of technologies, practice is even more important. You may be thinking that assigning practice doesn't take much skill, but it's an important link to bring practice into the fold. It will reinforce learning, and the more years that I've spent teaching and training, the more I realize that this is also a skill to develop and one that I'm continually working on. And so the ways that we might assign practice, first of all, during class, we want to allow frequent opportunities for participants to practice, and this will allow you time to work directly with those who are behind or to address any issues that arise during class, and it will help learners incorporate the materials that have been covered. At the end of class, assign practice for patrons to work independently. Now, in the library setting, this might seem strange to offer practice. You're thinking, I've just taught a single workshop, I'm not going to be grading any of their assignments. Now, that's true, but if you don't assign your students practice, it's kind of like dropping them off in a strange part of town or a strange part of your county without a map and asking them to find their way home. So giving an assignment can help learners know what to do next. Give them ideas for what to practice or how to integrate the new knowledge into their daily life. And if you've just helped them to open an email account, for example, tell them to find 5 friends with email addresses and to send them an email message in the next week. You're just giving them ideas of how to incorporate this into their life. And lastly, share additional resources and tutorials and websites, other places for self-paced learning where they might be able to continue. This is also a great opportunity to promote your library's technology guidebooks if you have any, so you can bring those into the classroom. All right. So with that, we've just finished the tips 6 through 10, so the last 5 tips on our list. But I do have one surprise before we come to our wrap-up questions, and that is that I have a special bonus tip. By making it through all 10 tips, you've unlocked the special bonus. Hooray! And this one I think is really worth mentioning, to have fun. Technology instruction, we often take it very seriously, but we want to have a bit of fun while we're doing it too and share our enthusiasm for this tool, whatever it is you're teaching. You may not have confetti or party hats or pugs at your next technology class, but there are plenty of ways that you can bring fun into your teaching. Here are just a few ideas that I recommend. I'm sure that you can think of many, and I don't have to tell any of you how to have fun. It's just a reminder to bring it into your class. And the last one that I have on the list here is what I really want to mention is practice with fun websites. And just an idea, you know, if you're going to do something like Google Maps or Google Earth in your training, what if you went to a really fun place to show them how to use it? What if you took everybody to Disneyland? Right? That would be kind of a fun and very different way to address a topic during class. So with that, you know, here we are. We've got our top 10 skills for teaching tech, plus a bonus tip. And so you've got these, you'll have the slides in the archives, you'll have this as a reference. We're about to take some questions, but before we do, I just want to ask you to do one thing before you get off this webinar today. I want you to pick 2 skills that you would like to improve on and write them down, make a note of them. And then set a goal for improving those 2 skills over the next 3 months. What can you do to improve those skills? And what are you going to do to practice them? So write those down before the webinar so that you'll remember when you come back. I know that many times we get done with the webinar and run off to something else. So jot down a couple of ideas now before you forget them. What did you identify with the most? But at this point, I do want to say thank you for being a great audience. We've got time for questions and answers, but in case any of you have to jump off early, here's my contact info, and you're welcome to reach out to me. But I feel like I've actually learned a lot from you, and the chat's been going so quickly, I'm going to have to go back and read the archive to see all of your great ideas, but I really appreciate the participation because we all have a lot to share with each other, so thank you for that. Jennifer?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Crystal. Really excellent session. And yes, there have been lots and lots of excellent ideas shared in chat. The chat will be posted as a part of the archive. So you can go back and browse that as well. There were a couple other comments and questions that came up. I just have to tell you that it did we were laughing out loud here. Some folks even started sharing tech jokes in chat. So know that this is a great crowd. They definitely have the have fun piece nailed down. So there were questions about practice exercises. Are there favorite resources that you use to share what, you know, either where you send people or what kinds of practices you provide on your handouts?
Well, I think there's twofold. One is having the resources to continue learning, right? And so my favorite, GCF Learn Free, which I see has been shared in the chat, is one of my favorites for most of the basic topics, and it has some degree of interactivity in it. Digital Learn is another one that has some interactivity involved and focuses on the very basic level, and those are included in the archive. So as far as sending people places where they can learn more about a topic once the class is finished, I think also it's worth, you know, and this is where I said it takes practice, kind of identifying, reflecting on the topic that you're teaching and saying, what do I want people to do when they leave? What's the next step for them? And then maybe finding a special resource that ties to something we covered during the class. As far as practice, though, I think it's really about what is the learner going to be able to identify with most? What are they going to want to do? And so sometimes we're inclined to create these elaborate practice exercises where people are using Excel to create a budget and following step-by-step instructions. I would say that it doesn't have to be that detailed, that you can really just point them in the right direction and give them hints. Here's something you could do, much like the email example I gave. Here is something you can do that maybe relates to your life, and you're going to explore that on your own and figure it out. And you know what? If you have questions, come back to the library and ask us more questions, and we're happy to help you.
Absolutely. And I love how you've alluded to building that relationship with folks. There were a couple of suggestions that came through of how to address, either being a single person library or, not being able to provide training in the way that maybe you dream to. Someone suggested just having a drop-in day, maybe a specific day of the month where you make yourself available for that. And also inviting folks to come back to tell them what they did with that learning, especially if they're applying for jobs online, how great to have them know that you're excited to have them return to the library to update them on that as well.
Yeah.
And you did mention volunteers, and I'll try to find some examples and post those to the archive page, but someone just asked about using teen volunteers to help older adults. I know there was a recent article posted to Web Junction about that, and I've heard great success with that. What a great way to build leadership amongst your youth, to connect them intergenerationally, but also to have cyber seniors teaching across all ages as well. Oh, here's a good question. Do you have strategies for dealing with patrons who keep signing up for the same class over and over again?
Yes, that's a great question. And I think, there's a part of this which is, what does the library want to do? Is there a policy about how much participation is allowed? And I've heard of places saying you can take the class 2 or 3 times, and then after that you've graduated. Depending on how busy your classes are, it can be nice to allow people to repeat it as frequently as possible, because sometimes they like the opportunity for practice. And I think if that works, right, and this is sometimes where you have to try it to see if it works in your community. The way it can sometimes backfire is that you do have somebody who comes, much like the question about the individual user who's always asking questions, that it becomes a social activity. And if that's the case, then that's where that policy might be handy to say, well, even to be able to use it loosely to say, I think you've graduated this class now, and it's time for you to maybe try more on your own, or here's the next step for you, to help encourage them in that right direction. I did have a case actually where I was teaching in a library and had the same person came to almost every class I ever taught, unless he was away on vacation or ill. And it was great. He was always learning something new, but it got to the point where nobody else was coming to the classes either. So we decided to discontinue classes for a while, because and then let him know he could come and ask us questions as he needed to. And that worked out really well, because then we weren't tying up the resources for a class for one person who had taken it multiple times.
Oh, wow. That is interesting. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. He was really, he was really sweet though, and he actually was learning every time. It just became a strange use of resources to have a 90-minute or 2-hour class for one person, so we just kind of shifted his focus a little bit. But he was actually very motivated to learn more and really appreciated our instruction.
Right. Well, that was, somebody also suggested, I was trying to find what they called it, Everyone Learns Day. So, you could certainly encourage them to be teaching others in the class as well. So I see questions about whether chat will be available. Yes, chat is posted on the archive, will be posted on the archive page later on today. So yes, you'll be able, and I'll pull out any of the links that were shared and add those to the archive page as well. I did have one interesting question. There are some libraries out there who might be a little bit more behind in their technology. How do you address issues when patrons are coming in who have more experience with newer computers or operating systems, and they get frustrated with those older systems?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So they're coming in to use the library computers, which are now older and maybe harder to relate to. This is where having, especially in a teaching, to focus on the teaching environment, having one-on-one appointments can be really helpful because then you can help them learn on their device. And as long as staff are comfortable kind of testing out and learning with the patron, if the device they may not be familiar with, but that way the patron gets to learn in the environment that they're familiar with. Obviously, if it's a desktop computer, that's not going to work as much. But if they've got a laptop or something, then teaching them right on their own device can be a great solution for that. And then maybe just asking them to have a bit of patience otherwise.
Yeah, that is a good idea. And I know I'll try to find there are policies that libraries sometimes post when they are assisting patrons on their own devices. So there are some great ways to address that if that's a concern at your library.
Yeah.
All right, well, we are at the top of the hour. I want to thank you again, Crystal, for your excellent work, and we look forward to hearing where your new business takes you with Kieran. And just a reminder that all of our upcoming webinars are shared on WebJunction. So in September, you can join Crystal's partner in her new business, Kieran Hickson, will be presenting a webinar. So also thank you to the Learning Roundtable for their excellent collaboration on this work and ongoing webinars, and we look forward to partnering with them again. And again, just a reminder that you can stay connected to WebJunction and all of our ongoing events and resources by subscribing to Crossroads, our monthly e-newsletter, which you can do on the homepage, or also browse any of our past issues on the Crossroads page. So thank you again, Crystal, and thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the production team, and thank you to those of you who joined us on the live stream. We look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you.